So I'm going to read back to you what I heard from Mark about the process, but I'm going to change it just a little. So originally it was going to be just a fireside chat between he and I, then it grew to two of us, and then it grew to three. So what he said is, spend 10, 15 minutes talking about what you do and how it makes you think. Having been on panels before where I sat quietly while somebody else spoke for 15 minutes, I thought before that, why don't I let these two guys introduce themselves and where they come from? Then I'll come back and ramble on for 10 or 15 minutes, and they can interrupt me and opine. But I would love for folks to ask as many questions as possible during or after, because I think that's where the learnings are. I mean, I'm looking here at an audience of folks from all around the country and the world, both here and in Zoom. And I have flown around the world to speak on the realities of Silicon Valley, usually to entrepreneurs, trying to help them understand whether they should be spending time here or not. But I'll try to, for all I know, you're going to get bored and say, this isn't interesting. If you do, be like, but feel free to interrupt. But let me let you two guys sort of talk briefly about what you do, and so people understand the perspective they're going to have before I give them a longer version of myself.
Where do you want to go? Let me go?
Yeah, you're next.
Yeah, I got recruited here to speak. I have had a long career as a CFO in the Valley. You could probably tell my accent. I actually grew up in the greater Boston area. And the best move, and I tell people this, that I ever made was coming out. Everyone talked about 128. I grew up there and I went to school there. But the best move I made a long time ago is coming out to the Valley. I believe, and this was the area of technology and finance, and I have a finance degree, and I combine that with an undergrad technology degree, and so I've been in finance. And over the years, I've been in seven public companies as CFO, including basically semiconductors, database software, application software, internet, and security. There's no place, I still think, and I look at a lot of information, a lot of charts, I still think there's no place like the Valley in terms of innovation. I like the comment today. I was having breakfast with a good friend of mine, and we talked about how Europe exports regulation and we export innovation. And it's actually, it sort of summarizes how I think about some of the geographies. But I think this area remains vibrant. Employment, I was looking at some stats last night. The employment is down, but I think the innovation wave is great. Since I left CFO of Yahoo, and before that I was Fortinet, which we took public, I did run a family office for Eric Schmidt called Hillspire for 5 years, left that in about a year ago, 2022. Now I'm on a number of public, private, nonprofit boards, manage my own investments. Advise a few companies, and I do have some time to play from, which I enjoy. I actually like to kiteboard and ski. I'm involved with the San Francisco Warriors as well as an investor. But I see a lot from a technology point of view, and we'll talk a little bit about how I think about investing when we get into Q&A.
Hi, I'm Ed Oates. Thanks for the nice introduction. Yeah, we founded Oracle in 1977. I retired from Oracle in 1996, right after one of the other founders, Bob Miner, passed away of cancer. And he asked me a key question: are you having fun? And if the answer is no, why are you here? And I said, oh, okay. So made different decision to spend more time with music, with nonprofits, ran a couple of small, more retail-oriented companies, which made money on the real estate we invested in, not on the companies themselves. But part of the question is what makes Silicon Valley a unique place on the planet? And there's a couple of things. The technology really started by, Fairchild and Intel, the Lockheed missiles in space. I mean, these brought technology to this area. But also we have two great R1 institutions, Stanford and Berkeley. But we also have two lesser known universities, Santa Clara, which is relatively small, and San Jose State, which is coming into its own probably in the last decade or so. Interesting facts, the most predominant degree at Apple comes from San Jose State. The most predominant degree at Google comes from San Jose State. And there's lots of innovation is becoming a big part of what happens at San Jose State. We have a new science building. The business school is really doing well. So part of what makes this place great is not only innovation, but the workforce that shows up here. That, when you're building a company, you've got your founders who may be PhDs and gosh knows whatever, but sooner or later you have to hire 1,000 engineers to do work. And those engineers tend to come from San Jose State. and, other similar kinds of institutions. Yeah, it would be interesting to do something because there's a huge entrepreneurial club at San Jose. At any rate, where's the valley going? I think part of the issues, the big issue the valley will have with both workforce and innovation is it's so flippin' expensive to be here. So you have companies like, Oracle decamping for Austin, and apparently, according to Larry, Nashville. I'm not sure why Nashville, other than health information systems, and Tesla leaves the place. But if you drive around Redwood Shores, Oracle is still kind of there. The Emerald City continues to exist, even though headquarters theoretically is somewhere else. But I think we'll see more companies doing that. They'll move their formal headquarters elsewhere, and their workforce will distribute itself because of technology. So we will have necessarily less local workers in those areas doing the day in, day out work. And I think we'll see more companies founded outside the area for exactly that reason as well. So unless we can get a handle on, the costs here, it's kind of unreal, whether you're running a big company, whether you're trying to start a company, or whether you're trying to run a university or a nonprofit. It's hard to compete. So
I agree with that, but I do think it's funny when I go to Boston and other areas. I don't find the intensity and commitment sometimes, and these are all general statements, I know, that you find out here. And I just think out here, there's something that people just, it's sort of like, why is so much AI here? There's just something about the intensity of business and commitment to starting companies and working really, really hard that I don't think exists. Again, this is a broad generalization, I know, so I be careful what I say, although I don't really care, actually.
So, but Morris, look, this is
The reality is I don't
say
care.
whatever you want.
But
it is a continuous argument whether you can recreate Silicon Valley anywhere else.
No,
And I would say
can't
quite
happen.
simply, you cannot. I remember something like 10 years ago, I was invited to.
But you're agreeing with me, sort of.
Well, I would be more aggressive and say,
Oh,
they're
even more
great
aggressive.
people all around the world, but then they just come here, right? So this is Florence during the Renaissance. If you were one of the great artists of the time, you went to Florence to be amongst other great artists. The same is true. Silicon Valley is as much made up of, I'd say half my entrepreneurs are Indian descent, Israeli, and by the way, natives who moved here for their entrepreneurship, who might have I had a company, two French guys, couldn't get their visas certified, had to move back to France. The best and brightest come to Silicon Valley. It will not be replicated for a variety of reasons. Now, there's constant debate on what makes Silicon Valley unique. There is a theory that the pioneering spirit, all right? So our prior Americans came over from the UK, and they made it all the way over to the East Coast. To get from there to here was a nightmare from hell, right? You were probably going to die, whether that was from Indian attacks or just from something as simple as getting a cut and getting infections and then dying from that. So it took a lot just to get here in the first place. And there's an argument that has continued on to this day. There's an even better argument, though, that I love. First state in the Union that had disallowed non-competes. Fairchild Semiconductor and the Hateful Eight, right? Only because this was the only place you could leave a company and start a direct competitor for it and not get sued by your employer and get shut down. And that created a wellspring of opportunity. Also, there's a constant, it's cheaper to start businesses somewhere else. It's also a lot cheaper when you sell them, right? So, as an example, in Canada, you get a stipend for every engineer you have. I thought that was great. So much less expensive to start a company here. Company didn't work out. The talent was phenomenal. What did the investors get? I care about this from the investor perspective. Nothing. The people got jobs. Here, there's always going to be a place they can land. Probably at the same, they call it a talent acquisition. Harder to do these days than it used to be. But I flew to Moscow to open Sokobo, which was their attempt to be Silicon Valley. A lot of countries think.
Want to go there now?
No, that was probably I feel the same way about Russia. I feel about Israel. I'm half Jewish. I'm half Russian. I don't have any interest in ever going back to either place. Those were one-offs that were interesting and I don't need to do again. Every country thinks if they invest enough money, they can recreate what we have. They will not. France is doing a decent job. Now, I don't want to underestimate the fact that there's a wellspring of entrepreneurship all around the world. But there will not be a competitor to Silicon Valley that gets close, as far as I can tell, ever. And I'll die on that particular hill. I do want to spend more than a few moments. I'll set my little clock here so I don't go over my 10-minute allotment. But I want to tell you about my journey here in Silicon Valley. Not because, ooh, look at me. But, so one of the things I say to my entrepreneurs all the time, there are 3 sources of advice you can get. There's experience. That is generally valuable. There is opinion. That is generally questionable. And there is hearsay, and that is highly dangerous. So if you don't understand the source of the advice, it's hard to take it. There are many VCs, well, not many, there's a handful of VCs, some very specific ones I won't name, that are smart but not wise. You're born with your intelligence, right? You come out of the womb with whatever intelligence you have, and that ain't changing. Now, you may apply it or not, but your wisdom is earned, right? And so they have these folks that if they don't have the wisdom, but they're in a boardroom and they want to show value, they start spewing out all these, oh, well, I think, Zuck did this. Really? I didn't realize you were a Facebook investor and board member. Oh, I wasn't, but you know Zuck. No. Well, you knew some of his team. Well, no. Why do you know? Oh, I read it. Thanks. My son reads things in Reddit all the time that cause all kinds of horrible arguments. If you don't have the source data, I don't want to hear from you. So my point is, I'll tell you where I came from so that when you ask questions of all of us, you'll know whether the answer is of any relevance to you. I was an entrepreneur for 25 years. I started one of the first .coms in 1993. I took it public in 99. All that was in New York. Moved here about 20 years ago, and I saw this big gap in the market between angel and venture. Basically, if you look at venture investing, if you sort of think about, you can tell me if you feel differently on this, pre-2000, something like 90% of venture firms were 100 million or less, maybe 200-300 million. Post-2000, advent of the multi-billion-dollar venture fund. I mean, I came out of NEA, which now has $30 billion in total. But if you go back to their only 10X fund ever, that was a $300 million fund, okay? So venture, all of a sudden, when it had more money, so one of the realities of venture, I'll try to sprinkle in realities of venture into this, is that no matter how, so there's an issue with growing funds. Personally, I believe that the growth of fund size is nothing more than greed for fees. It's a short-sighted and a foolish thing. The more AUM you have, the more fee money you collect. Well, fees are an advance on future earnings, right? I give all my fees back when I'm in carry. So I do need money to run my business, but I mean, I'm a 10% GP commit in my own fund. I'd like to do a 0 and 50 fund. Anybody wants to give me $50 million to do 0 and 50, let me know. Because I'd rather just get paid on my success. The money that goes in at fees always gets returned. But the bigger you get, and also these are very long time horizons, you're talking about 10 to 15 years at this point before you see liquidity. So people grow their funds. You can look, NEA certainly has done that. I mean, it has become a different asset class. It's like a private equity version of venture. And Andreessen, I don't want to go down that particular road because I'll never be able to say anything positive and then people will later get mad at me. Although I would argue if you're investing, I hope you expect return. And if someone doesn't give it to you for a decade, I'm not quite sure why you would continue to support them. Although in Kleiner's case, they left a decade of returns to the side and have managed to come back and are probably doing a very good job right now, mainly because of one person. The importance of one person in venture cannot be misunderstood. It is critical. NEA is NEA because of Scott Sindel and Forrest Basket. So 2 people.
Can I throw that one person question at you? Yep. We have way too many WhatsApp chats, and on one of them, it was who's more important.
Many what?
WhatsApp chats.
Oh, really? Okay.
So one question, Charles, was because he was having a founder issue. Was that who is more important, Jobs or Wozniak?
Jobs.
I would say Jobs. Because Jobs, so one of the things.
Why do you ask the question?
Yeah, it's
Seems
Well,
obvious
because you talked about that was not the answer of the WhatsApp group necessarily.
That's a question of somebody saying, is the visionary leader more important than the person that built the tech? Okay, it is the visionary leader. Now they need the person that builds the tech. As an example, I had a young guy that was working with me for about a year, and I left NEA to be a solo act, and I'm back to being a solo act, and it was I should have just stayed a solo act. But he'd go out and market the fund, and I was like, you got to understand, you're selling me, right? You're selling a 14-year track record, period. There's nothing else there. And that story will or will not land you LP dollars. Jobs was, you know, was obviously a mythical figure around here. We actually overlapped because we both had kids in the same school, and I knew his wife a little bit. He was probably one of the most unapproachable human beings I've ever met. Just not a soft and cuddly guy, but a phenomenal visionary, a phenomenal storyteller. And I used to worry that I valued storytelling too much. And I used to look, my fund has 3 GPs, me, myself, and I. And we argue all the time. And
Who wins?
one of us always wins.
Who loses?
Never consistent. One of us always loses. Usually, you know, it's in the amphitheater of a car where no one can see me yelling at myself. But, you know, I've got 40 VCs as LPs, and I reach out to them for advice, and maybe I'll, you know, role play something with them. But, you know, so I worry a lot about this, you know, when you sort of try to be self-reflective. I know I talk too much. It's worked out for me for 58 years. I'm not going to change it. I tried, it didn't work, so I'm going back to it. I worry that, you know, random stuff. I went 3 years as a seed investor starting in 2007 and didn't have a single failure. That really worried me. That meant I wasn't taking enough risk. How can you not have failures? You're basically backing people with PowerPoint slides. And to this point, sorry, just to close it, because I know that was a longer answer than you wanted. I think you can't underestimate the importance or overestimate the importance of storytelling. It is how you raise money. It is how you get clients. It's how you get press. It's how you get public coverage. It's how you get Wall Street to care. It's how you get the buyers of your public stock. It is how you get people to leave their jobs where they're being paid 4 times as much as you're offering them and work for you instead. And that is why jobs is more important.
Yeah, I agree. You need a visionary. And I mean, I don't want to say anybody can build tech. That's not true. I mean, but you think about Wozniak, you know, he would have been fine to build a board computer that he gave away because he thought people should have computers. Steve saw an opportunity that was orthogonal to whatever else was happening in the world. I think about Oracle. Who was the most important founder? Larry, clearly. He didn't build the tech. Bob and I built the tech along with some other people, but Bob and I built the tech. Larry was the visionary.
No question.
Larry had chutzpah, and we didn't. We just write code, you know, and think of interesting ways to implement and optimize the database code and all. Larry figured out, well, where can this go? He was
You know,
a visionary.
the,
He built he made, you know, you got a plane of stuff, it's orthogonal, and all really successful innovations are revolutions they're orthogonal to whatever else is happening right now, and they don't always work.
The question also
know,
goes
let me-
to a
I-
myth of entrepreneurship. Sorry, I'll pause for 1 second, but I think this is important to understand, even though this is not an audience of entrepreneurs. You know, I get so
We would differ with that. We might differ. with
well, a different type of entrepreneur.
that. Sure.
There is a myth of an entrepreneurship, which is the brilliant idea is what I should be able to do. There's I could, you know, that was my idea. I thought of Facebook. I thought of whatever. It's worthless. Execution is what matters. And so I get so many pitches where this is my idea. Okay, well, fine, come back to me when you're actually achieving something with it. Entrepreneurs believe that if their technology is magical enough, some entrepreneurs, that is enough, that is the magic, and it is absolutely not. It is table stakes. I cannot remember the number of times, I mean, CRISPR maybe, Google. I mean, come up with 5 technologies that were so world-changing that even if monkeys were running it, it would have been fine.
So, Ken, you biting into
If I get
the
a word in.
Hard with me.
Who do you think is the longest, you know, you talk about Oracle, who do you think is the longest running CEO founder in the Valley? Jensen Huang, 31 years. He's been CEO of NVIDIA, 31 years.
yeah.
I thought it was Larry, but it turns out Larry's no longer CEO technically.
That's right.
So Jensen Huang. So you talk about, he's only 61, so to speak. So, and the company is now worth, I don't know, the market, it was up after hours, so it's probably worth 2.5 trillion. I'm going to talk to a little bit quickly on different venture asset classes. So I do go into a lot of boutique firms, small, partly because it gives me a sense of what's going on. So I learn a lot. And these could be based here, they could be based in Israel, they could actually, I've been in a few based in India, based in Middle East. So you get and I see how you go a lot of different places. So I see a lot of different companies being formed, and I get a lot of knowledge by doing that. I'm in a lot of large funds. It turns out I'm in NEA. I've been in probably half the NEA funds. I call it the index fund of venture because it's in so many things. It isn't just so big. There are other funds bigger, but it sprays a lot. So I do that. But I know Scott Sendell and some of the other folks, and so I like that. I think the challenge with venture, so here's the challenge with venture. When I started several companies, or we started, a better way of saying it, the only way you had an exit is when the only way you made money is you had a real exit, either an M&A or an IPO. That's not the case anymore. There's way more secondary markets. So consequently, some of the best companies, Stripe, Databricks, I could go name, Canva, they don't go public anymore. They just keep on selling secondary shares. And so as an LP, it's much, much harder to get capital out. I still like venture. I learn a lot. It's probably why I'm in it. I happen to like private equity because private equity, I can touch and feel the companies, and I feel very confident I'll get teens returns, which I'm frankly quite happy about. A lot of people today go into credit funds, which is an interesting asset class as well. So, I think, I would just say I think innovation really is alive and well here. It was brought up as interest. I do, when I forgot to mention, you mentioned it about non-competes. It turns out FTC now wants to have non-competes across the country. That hurt Massachusetts not having non-competes. So you leave EMC, you got sued. This day after you left, you basically got sued. That doesn't happen here, and I would contend that's held back a lot of the activity in Massachusetts because when companies got larger, they didn't have the outgrowth of companies like you have in the Bay Area, and we just have that great entrepreneurial spirit here, and that's why I keep on doing what I'm doing, and not at quote unquote young age.
And by the way, that point matches really well to history. Venture used to be dominated by Route 128 VCs, okay? Greylock was stronger on the East Coast. Their office here was like in Bumble, like literally like 30 minutes down the road, San Mateo, in some high rise. It was like, what the heck? But eventually, they dominated the returns, and they moved to a beautiful, brand-new construction Sandhill facility. So Boston is an afterthought at best right now in venture. New York is more prominent, and it's now the second best venture community in the world. But there was this material shift, and I think I had not thought about it that way, but the fact that Boston handicapped itself, literally put iron shackles around its ability to have innovative growth, is probably a material reason why I don't say we, because I'm really out of New York, but we kick the crap out of them at Silicon Valley.
Yeah, by the way, there's no, I think it's pretty true. At least I know when I was trying to take a company public in the Boston area, there are basically no tech bankers in Boston. It's unbelievable. Yeah, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all the major banks have tech bankers here. Try to go to Boston. Everyone talks about New York. New York is great, but I can't think of an AI company in New York.
Yeah, well, New York is better for fintech as an example.
but there's no AI.
But what about Seattle again?
Seattle is, it's funny you say that. 8 of the top 10 highest market cap companies in the world, 8 of the top 10 are tech companies. 6 of them are here, 2 in Seattle. Just be thankful you're here, for those that are here.
I just signed a term sheet with a company in Seattle.
Sun shines.
But they flew here to see me.
So no, I think the activity is unquestionably still here. Seattle is strong. I was just talking to a friend of mine, Voyager Capital. I'm not gonna. Well, I already gave his name. Yeah, too late not to. But they're raising money. I've been in a bunch of their funds, but they're based in Seattle. There's a number of funds, Mavron, a number of funds in Seattle. He was talking to me about it yesterday. It's a very vibrant area. He tells me Portland is good. I don't believe him for a lot of reasons, which will really get me in trouble. So I'm not going to say why I don't want to be.
Well, LA has got a handful of funds.
But Seattle is, I think Seattle, you got obviously Amazon, Microsoft, but you have a lot of other companies too.
How about outside the U.S.?
I'm sorry?
Outside the U.S.
France is doing a good job.
Well, you
they've
think
got a lot
Latin
of
America.
I love LATAM. I think France is investing a lot. So for about 2 years, I spent time. So everybody is the victim of whatever cyclicality or global political realities happen. I don't think it's speaking out of turn to say that, NEA historically had a very large investment history in China, right? And all of a sudden doing business in China became hard. So I spent about so what happens when you have, NEA always followed this sort of one fund strategy so the money could flow wherever it made sense, which is highly logical. Imagine you raise $1 billion fund for China and then all of a sudden we can't do business with China anymore. So I started exploring with maybe one other person whether or not Europe might be an opportunity. Why? There was $42 billion worth of liquidity out of the Nordics, right? Zettel, Spotify, and then King and Supercell did really well. So as soon as VCs, my favorite analogy for how VCs act is not lemmings, it's penguins. Someone said to me once, yeah, VCs are just like a bunch of penguins on the ice floe. And I'm like, that's an odd, what do you mean? I said, well, the penguins waddle over to the side of the ice floe and they stare in the water and they know there are fish in there and they really want to eat them, but they also know there are things that will kill them, like walruses or sea lions, so they don't go in the water. But then one day one of them slips, falls in and comes back with a fish and doesn't die. And then all the other penguins slide into the water. So, as soon as you see Europe wasn't interesting to anybody until you saw $42 billion worth of liquidity. But when I spent those 2 years exploring Europe, what I found is there are so many little epicenters of creativity and entrepreneurship. France, certainly Paris, there's like 3 cities in Germany. The Nordics are ripe with opportunities. The UK, probably the closest to us. If you're a venture investor, most of them just go to the UK. The laws are similar. We have the NVCA, the National Venture Capital Association. They have the BVCA, the British Venture Capital Association. The BVCA's rules are actually slightly more advantageous to the investor, which is great. The law firms are the same. Horrifically slow, by the way. You never want to do business with a UK law firm if you can avoid it. I have never seen such turgid behavior. It is insane. Sorry, but anyway, it is interesting that they can get anything done over there considering how slow they move. It's just like everything should take months and months and months. Israel, security and other things. And I do think LATAM, mainly fintech though.
I think there's one of the challenges in Europe, there really isn't a vibrant stock exchange to go if you're a new company. I was on a board of a company called Avast, which we ended up taking public on the London Stock Exchange, and then it got acquired. But the trouble is, interestingly enough, you go to London Stock Exchange, board members can't get stock. They feel it's a conflict of interest.
Is that right, Mark?
Did I insult a local UK lawyer in the room? Sorry about that.
Mark was, he and I are partners at EY, and he was pushing the LSE for Russian issuers at
Most
the
of the companies
time.
you're going to invest in outside of the United States, you're going to hope to have a U.S.
But they are. But my point, that's exactly my point, is, that doesn't help Europe, the fact that they don't have a NASDAQ and NYSE that's supportive and encouraging to list there. I agree you do that. But you think if you wanted to really create a vibrant market over there, you'd have a stock exchange like NASDAQ that'd be very successful over there.
All right, I want to open this up, but it's a different kind of question. But what do you think of China and its innovation today, and how does it impact your,
Right now.
not as a place to invest, but as a force?
Dangerous.
The what? Force? Oh,
Unpredictable.
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's well, it's the same thing as uninvestable.
I have this, I was a freelance writer for a long time, and I've always wanted to be able to write more fiction, which I never got published. I got published for nonfiction. And my current novel in my head is a deep science fiction book where you jump forward 10 years from now. Quantum computing actually works, right? Which is incredible because as recently as a week ago, I talked to somebody who said their most recent quantum machine can do the work of 1 million days or hours of a regular computer's work in an hour. Wow. Okay, then you bring the most recent version of truly almost sentient GAI. Okay, you take GAI, you put them on quantum. We don't know. Nobody that builds GAI understands how it works, which is sort of fascinating, right? Because it teaches itself. And then you put it on the system that you don't actually know how it works, except for the very basic molecular level of the, whatever entangled particle. And then you get China and Russia to throw $500 billion apiece into a bucket to build out a data farm of quantum machines and power it with AI and ask it how to destroy the United States of America. I don't think that's an unrealistic thing. And I think it's a material risk to us. And I think that, it's orthogonal to the question of China, but, we will regulate AI and it's probably appropriate, but we will, I'll bet you 100 to 1, there'll be no regulations at all in China. So whatever we worry about will be done, and it'll be done by our enemies.
But, even without AI, cybersecurity, I mean, the Russia, China, and other countries are state actors in cyber, and no firm or even public utility can compete with unlimited source of funds. So cyber, and if you apply AI to cyber and certainly stick quantum computing in the mix, everything's vulnerable.
You know, the thing that's so amazing is when people talk about quantum, pretty much the only thing they talk about is how endpoint security can be breached, which is a legitimate problem, but it's only one. That's like saying, hey, I invented fire. We got to figure out how not to burn our hands. Okay, what about all the other things that are destructive? Or we invented gunpowder. We better figure out how to use these firecrackers effectively. So
Let me pause for a second. Just let's to your point, get interaction. Okay, go.
Gentlemen, great panel here. 20 years ago, a well-known Chinese tech CEO already publicly said that, Jason Ma, that China was spending close to $100 billion on cyber. That's 2 decades ago. So you can imagine what's going on now. My concern is that when it comes to AI and all that, it's very exciting. We all know that, right? But, you know, the US, we have ethics, horizontally, vertically, public, private sector, sir, but those other actors, so I'm wondering what your perspective is.
it's just, I don't see how we can be in such a lopsided fight. I despise our political parties. I think they both suck. I think politicians generally suck. I've seen maybe 1 or 2 where I would want to believe they're doing the right thing. I think they probably get into it for the right reasons when they're 12, and then their morality gets eaten away by corrosive acid of the realities we live in. So I don't love anything that our political structure gets involved in. I would generally a free markets person. I think that we will have no choice, if for no other reason than public attention, to have some level of regulation and guidance on AI in this country. I believe we will be incompetent at it. When was the last time you saw the best and brightest from your company, from the universities, from anywhere go into government? Right? Like, our people are massively understaffed. It'll be a disaster. But I do hope there are interesting groups where both the 3-letter agencies, the CIA and everybody else funds venture. There's a new group, a buddy of mine's running that's doing it for the elite soldiers, the Rangers and the SEALs. And I hope that there is enough investment in technology that aids our military and 3-letter organizations and enough freedom. I would like them to have some protection in their ability to build defensive and offensive capabilities in this sphere, even if we have to limit the things that a public corporation can do. If our soldiers can't, if you're going to send your soldier out with a knife to fight somebody with a 50 caliber mounted machine gun on the back of a Jeep, you already know the outcome. So we need to find a way to empower our at least our military.
I mean, what I would just quickly say, I think it's, I think it's a concern when you think of who could be infiltrating our networks here in China. But, as you asked the question, I was trying to think of, and I'm sure there are, but I couldn't think of any major Chinese cybersecurity companies. And I'm sure there are, I just can't think of them. So maybe.
Other than the state.
They come in. They come in through different horses.
Yeah.
Trojan-like.
So I think the problem is I just don't, so they come in through the state, but I just can't think of any independent major Chinese security companies, at least I can think.
Other questions?
Just on that note, I think the thing that may save us in terms of cyber, because as you say, there's lots of applications of all this stuff. Cyber is one aspect, will be the private sector. The private sector needs to defend itself, and it will. So you'll have the Oracles and the Googles and startups that figure out how to apply AI and quantum computing to at least the defensive aspects of cyber. One of the many aspects of those things will get applied. And because cyber applies not only to stealing company secrets and shutting down utilities, but it's, stealing your credit card. If the fakes are getting much better now because they're applying AI to make good fakes. And so but there's the other side of that, which is defense. And I think private companies will figure it out.
Right here, one question.
I might have one question and maybe a follow-up question because I'm anticipating an answer. So, questions to all of you. How much do you know about the AI Act in Europe and any other regulations in China? What is your take on that? AI regulatory measures, the AI Act in Europe. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't have one, so.
Yeah, I must admit, I can't be thoughtful there. Sorry.
You know, someone said that the Europeans export regulation.
That was my comment. Yeah.
It's
I heard it
just,
today, I liked it.
you know, it's funny. I was talking to somebody, I think they were, yeah, it was a potential LP, and they said, you know, what's your investment pace like? And I'm like, I look for phenomenal. I look for founders that make me say, wow, I found 3 of them last year. How's it going this year? Well, I actually just signed a term sheet, so I'm super excited because it's been over a year since I've signed a term sheet, which is a little sad. I mean, my job is to say no, but I like to say yes at least, you know, once a year is too little. But he said, well, are you shifting your perspective on investing because of the elections? Like, no, I got a 10 to 15 year time horizon. I can't worry about current macro political realities as much as I despise them. Same thing would be true of, I don't invest in Europe. I invest in the UK. And unless they export their methodology here, you know, it's interesting. Europe is one of the things I learned when I was over there trying to look for the opportunity. It's still, you know, Europe isn't Europe the way the US is a united set of states. You know, I looked at companies I wanted to invest in Germany, and one of the things I learned from the locals is we still hate each other. Like, we still remember the wars. Like, you can't just take a German company and move into Italy. It doesn't work that way. You have language issues, you got other things, and it was fascinating. By the way, they also have to import a lot of their executives from the UK, which is probably the only place in the entire area that has hyper-growth executives that know what they're doing. So, sorry, let's move a rant.
Just a follow-up question, like I was heading somewhere with it. So do you think this social media-induced separation could be regulated in the first place if you would get ourselves together and put some, I would say, regulatory framework around it that leads to different outcomes as we are right now? I mean, like, we are talking about this election so hard because it might be induced by how we've been manipulating.
Could the US set up an appropriate structure to regulate AI now so that it could have a better outcome?
Learning from it, what we just did with the social media thing.
I would argue that's like saying, why don't we have the high school students tell the college kids how to act? Who's going to do that? Like, who are the people that, like, you look at, who remembers this one? We sell advertising, Senator, right? Like, the US, you got people that don't even understand. I'm not saying, you know, our 3-letter agencies. I have a recent experience with the FBI, not relevant to any of this, but I was so underwhelmed. I mean, what a horrible organization. What an incredibly slow, blame the other guy, it's not my department. Ugh. I mean, bureaucrats, I don't think there's a lower insult. There's a great Nassim, whatever, the guy that wrote Black Swan, has a great book out, and he basically talks about when you don't have skin in the game, nobody should trust you. And most people in politics don't. There's no consequence to them if they do it wrong. So, okay, we'll figure it out. You'll figure it out with what? You're going to get the best. You know how hard it is to get somebody out of OpenAI? What are you going to offer them? You got a few $1 billion of spare money to throw $10 and $20 million recruiting bonuses out because you're going to lose to startups if you don't. You don't have that. So I think it will be, no matter what we end up doing, we will not do it effectively.
Steven.
Ed, before this session started, we were talking about AI and the money that's going to be made and lost in it. Can you just comment on that? Maybe the other panelists as well.
In some ways, I look at the investment environment around AI right now. It reminds me very much of 1999 and 2000 and dot-coms. There's, you know, I hate to pick on single companies, but the companies, remember BlackRock, they were spending incredible amounts of money on advertising in the Super Bowl. And I have no idea to this day what BlackRock actually did, but they went away or got acquired or something like that. But when the dot-com implosion occurred, there were so many companies who existed on a napkin and a coffee mug. And they, you know, I used to talk to people, but you know, if you have the price earnings ratio, P ratio, well, if there's no E, then that number is meaningless. And I think we'll see a lot of that. There'll be good companies that show up. And I suspect that the good companies are more on the application side than inventing yet another AI engine.
I think it's not quite that bad. I think I mean, I agree with the thesis, but in 99, and I was clearly in that experience, so I know pretty well, you were paying for clicks, you're paying for eyeballs or whatever. You know, I think Webvan is probably the best example of that time, actually.
Netscape.
No, Netscape actually was
That's
okay.
.com?
I was in Webvan. But I think the challenge now is I think many of the companies are going to be real, but the valuations are crazy. So yeah, and I think that was the case even in 2021, when we had way too much money. Tiger Global being the best example of, and some others too. So I think the question there is where, the comment I would say is, there will be more real companies coming out, but I think you are being very. I worry. I mean, I see every day. Just look up strictly VC or venture Y, whatever. All these multi-billion-dollar valuations for companies that have 10, 20, 30 million revenue, and that's where I think the rubber will hit the road, in my opinion. So I think it's a very scary area to invest in for many of us.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about when Oracle or Apple or Microsoft started in 76, 77, we all went 10 years before we went public. We all had earnings, we had products that existed in the marketplace, we had growing revenue base, all that kind of stuff. And during the dot-bomb current, and I think now there are companies that basically don't have earnings to speak of.
Sure. I mean, you look at
They're
MuleSoft,
ready to go
never
public
had
and
earnings
get
and they
more
got bought for a lot.
Yeah.
MuleSoft was a company that went public, losing money, got acquired, losing money. I'm not going to say it's different this time, but I think to the heart of what I thought most of this conversation would be around, if you look at, a friend of mine was like, oh, you do early stage investing, so how do you think about PE multiples? I'm like, why would I think about those? Like, I'm investing in people at the very beginning. So, when you look at sort of traditional investors that don't spend time in venture, I'm not saying venture's its own unique, they call it now an asset class, although it's always been a cottage industry, now it's gotten bigger. One of the things I'll often tell people is VCs always have to overpay because the best entrepreneurs will not take any other offer. It's just a question whether you overpay now or overpay later. And as long as that trend continues, everybody makes a lot of money, right? The problem is when it changes. So the worst place this happens is in consumer DTC. It's always the same. Wow, 300 million in revenue, flatline. But the VCs paid here. And when it flatlines, no one's going to come to their rescue. Then you have a secondary problem, which you mentioned earlier, which was the sugar high of 2021 and Tiger and others coming in and dumping stunning amounts of money into companies. Even worse, by the way, SoftBank, which you've seen it in its results. There's a funny story I can't tell here publicly about the actual creation of the SoftBank, their vision fund, which explains a lot about why they acted the way they did. But they had no choice but to put money
That's
out.
why we have cocktails later. So that at least two more questions.
Mark, it's Anthony Gordon. Mark, I have a question.
All right, I got to respect Zoom. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Anthony Gordon. I'm a single family office CIO. I was thinking earlier about China security, and I was thinking about what the room thinks about two parts. Well, three. Tencent's engagement from the start, early 2000s till today, with the Chinese government, and how, in my opinion, it's almost like an extension of their, like a loudhailer, because there's such connectivity to, all the Tencent's users in the multiple ways which they engage on a daily basis. And then separate from that, Tencent's which is never spoken about in the main headline press that I read anyway, but how over that time frame of give or take 20, 25 years, they're very much entrenched in the US. Most notably, what we did see in the news is how Disney and Epic Games are intertwined, yet they don't talk about how Tencent is, I think, 40% stakeholder of Epic, which is far less than Disney's stake, and that games are entrenched in adult and also children's lives. You see in Boston the TikTok phenomenon, but surely there's feedback.
Anthony, is there a question?
No, yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting to the question. I'm just about done. But surely there's feedback as it relates to the garner and the assimilation of knowledge from these games with global and obviously US citizens. So this speaks about the security, the technology, and how things are connected. And the question is more commentary. What can you say about this, and what kind of questions should we be asking? The question is the question. The question is what's really going on.
So there's a concept that the way the Chinese approach intelligence gathering is fundamentally different than the way we do. They think of it as a Hoover vacuum that sucks up everything. Because ultimately, as technology evolves, think about DNA evidence. This is a random sidebar, but murder cases from 30 years ago have been solved because people preserved the evidence they had, and now as the technology is better, they can figure out who the person was or their relatives, right? And then track them back and take something out of their garbage. So conceptually, the Chinese appear to basically suck up everything. Remember the balloon? And then later, when quantum works, they can decode it. While the US appears to be a much more precise laser beam, sort of approach. So I can understand why there's a fear and a desire to cancel out things like TikTok. Personally, I'm not sure I care if you know what I scrolled through or what my daughter scrolled through. Tencent, in my experience, has always been a big winner in gaming. They're a big gaming organization in Asia, and Asian gamers are far more they actually have thumb dexterity that will never be matched by U.S. citizens. It's pretty amazing. I don't even bother. I play Call of Duty only in a regular environment. But net, they have gone in and
two more
paid
questions, Ben. That's one. So, Raj.
I'll try keep it brief. You've talked about China, UK, Europe. I'm based in Dubai, been there 22 years. What's your thoughts on Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh? Because we've got India next to us, right on our doorstep, with 100 million Gen Zers with talent in tech. We've got lots of capital. More and more US VCs are coming into the Middle East raising money. So what's your thoughts around that compared to Silicon Valley?
Well, I think I was just at the Milken conference, and I met a number of people from Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and it's funny. The juxtaposition is most folks think about going there for money, versus what I now hear is there is a budding entrepreneurial spirit to create companies over there. And I think that could be a big opportunity. And I think I'm going to spend some time there in the fall, going there personally. But if I were a betting person on an area that I think has a lot of opportunity, and I think I really hope we can get past the wars we're having right now, which is just not helpful for anybody. I think there's a big opportunity there, because I think the people want it. I think they want to do more than just oil, so to speak. I have now gone to a couple of funds there. They're small, so everyone's starting small as opposed to the state-run funds. But I'm seeing more venture funds being created from there, and people want to create companies there. So I am a big believer in the Middle East, and I just hope we can get past some of what's going on geopolitically there, so that we can go be a very, very much more vibrant area technologically wise. So I'm bullish.
Okay. We're going to be spending time there too, so we'll compare schedules. We'll recruit you again.
Where we ask for.
Any other questions before we go? The last question, we're going to move on to secondaries, which one reason I like secondaries is this is where the market really starts to be quantified, because there's been this lack of liquidity, and we're going to get into that in detail. Oh, now you're back. All right. Something I said.
No, I'm going to switch it up a little bit. With AI and ML, how do you see the litigation revolving around that with content ownership? And any thoughts about that from a VC perspective as companies start, you think about YouTube early on. I think that was a good example of a content infringer. Let's just fake it till we make it, and then they'll all come to the table. Do you think it's the same situation?
It's a perfect example because while, when Instagram sold for $1 billion, I said to somebody, everybody complained, oh, you're selling too early. And I was like, wait, you had these 2 23-year-olds that just, sold their company for $1 billion. You think they sold too early? Well, look at YouTube. They sold too early too. And it became the most important thing in Google. Yeah, with Google behind it. Here's the thing. Google bought YouTube for $1.3 billion, right? You know how much of that went to settling legal fees? There was like a $600 million set aside. They just fixed it. So they did fake it till they made it. They were one of many. I know Chad, and he's the one that broke through, but it cost a lot to clean up his mess. And assumedly, right now, though, those litigations are happening ahead of time, right? New York Times, everybody else. So I think this should be understood from case law in time for us to understand it. In the meantime, all VC investments are a probability-weighted set of outcomes that range from I lose all my money, 1x, to I make a butt ton of money, 100x or 1,000x, okay? And in between. And so part of that probability weighting is What are the risk factors that could kill my company and put me in the zero? And usually there's a finite amount of those. I actually would argue the bigger risks for AI investments are if and how you can build a moat to keep others from recreating exactly what you did. And just last point, because it's a transition to Anurag and the secondaries piece, you know, you were talking about how certainly companies are staying private a lot longer, right? Venture firms used to be 10 years with 2 one-year extensions. Now they're getting like 4 one-year extensions, but you don't get liquidity for 15 years. There's been almost no liquidity in the last 2 or 3 years, which puts pressure on VCs, it puts pressure on LPs. There is, however, the opportunity for liquidity in those secondaries, including for VCs. I don't like early liquidity, but I invested in a company called Rippling, which last week sent me a note that said, if you want, you can sell us your shares at $13.5 billion valuation. My cost basis is $35 million. Okay, do I greedily want to wait? I don't know. But if I need to get, you know, LPs will ultimately pressure their VCs for liquidity, and some of them will seek it via secondaries, including all kinds of opportunities.
Perfect segue. So first, thanks for making time